Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It gives us great pleasure to host the 2025 Sir Alasdair Breckenridge Lecture and Graduation Ceremony. A very warm welcome to all distinguished guests here at the Duke-NUS Auditorium and to those joining us virtually from around the world. I'm James, your MC for tonight, and I will be guiding you through the program tonight, which is also available by scanning the QR code displayed on the screen. As some of you may recall, the Sir Alasdair Breckenridge Lecture series has been hosted in conjunction with the celebration of a graduate certificate achievers. I'd now like to invite Professor Zilke Vogel, the course Deputy Director, who is also the Senior Associate Dean of Graduate Studies and Head of the Center of Lifelong Learning, on stage to formally open the graduate ceremony. Professor Vogel, please.
Good evening, distinguished guests, friends, and colleagues. A warm welcome to our core ceremony and the 2025 Sir Alasdair Breckenridge Lecture. It's actually my great pleasure to start this evening with the graduation ceremony. I'm particularly delighted to announce that for the first time, we celebrate graduates from 2 distinguished graduate certificates programs. Recognizing the evolving demands in health regulation, we expanded our flagship program in 2023 to offer specialized training through a certificate in pharmaceutical regulation and a certificate in medical technologies regulation, each addressing the unique regulatory challenges of their respective sectors. Today, we honor 37 exceptional professionals in our 6th graduating cohort. These graduates are dedicated working professionals who demonstrated remarkable commitment by balancing demanding careers while completing our 4 intensive modules to study. Their determination to expand their skills and knowledge, despite competing priorities, truly exemplifies the spirit of lifelong learning. And our new graduates now join the growing core community, which is a network that provides ongoing professional development and regulatory capabilities. Working across the healthcare ecosystem, from biotechnology companies to regulatory agencies, their expertise in balancing innovation with patient safety will be increasingly vital for healthcare innovation in Singapore. And so with that, congratulations to all our graduates. We are honored that you have chosen to study at CORE and Duke-NUS, and we look forward to the valuable contribution you will make to advancing regulatory science. And now to present the certificates to our graduate, may I please invite to the stage Professor Kenneth Muck, Director General of Health, and Professor Thomas Kaufman, Dean, Duke-NUS. And Dr. Rathi, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Vogel. Congratulations once again to the graduating cohort, having fulfilled the requirements for the graduate certificate in health products regulation and graduate certificate in medical technologies regulation. As I read out your name, please proceed to the stage to receive a certificate from the Director General of Health, Professor Kenneth Muck, and a gift from the Dean of Duke-NUS Medical School, Professor Thomas Kaufman. Chan Chen Ting. Ken Ning Wei Tracy. Sherry Wong Ewan. Chu Wei Zhong. Divya Jose Alika Muria. Dr. Han Yuan. 李秀珍、卢慧英、Maria Zamira、Megan Kai Ki Tan、Nicole Lo Yu Ray、Nur Akita binti Abdul Manan、Dr. Xiao Fulong Brandon、Dr. So Sui Yen、Huan Hui Fong Eileen、安思教、and Tong Gay Ki. We have now completed the segment for graduates who have joined us in the auditorium. Thank you, Professor Mark, and thank you, Dean, and also Dr. Rati, and you may all take your seats. Thank you. Following graduates are not in attendance with us today, but are joining us virtually. Please also extend your congratulations to them. Tasmin Lo, Han Min, Cheng Jia Ying, Tong Rui Hua, Ng Wai Chin, Hei Jia Ying Jane, Pratibha Nair, Sila Ying Clara, Ling Siu Mei Janice, Su Wei, Han Mei Shen Felina, Han Siming Teresa, Kyo Pei Chong Sean, Tok Swat Hong Sharon, Willie Yong Wei Lun, Wong Jong Yi, and Yap Hui Yen. Once again, congratulations to all graduates, and may you continue to pursue this journey of professional learning and learning as well. So now I'd like to invite our Executive Director, Professor John Lim, to share a few words. John, please.
Thank you, James. Professor Kenneth Mak, Director General of Health, Singapore, Professor Thomas Kaufman, Dean of the Duke-NUS Medical School, Professor James Kingsland, the 2025 Sir Alasdair Breckenridge Lecturer, Ministry of Health Regulatory Advisory Panel members, distinguished guests, friends, and colleagues. Let me add my congratulations to all the graduates from the 2024-25 Duke-NUS Graduate Certificate Programs in Health Products and Medical Technology Regulation. It's a great delight to see you all here this evening with your family and friends. It is now my great pleasure to welcome all of you to the 5th Sir Alasdair Breckenridge Lecture. But before we proceed with this year's lecture, we have a special tribute to a special person in our midst. This year marks Dean Tom Kaufman's 10th year leading Duke-NUS Medical School. And so, as he prepares to step down as Dean at the end of 2025, this milestone is especially meaningful to all of us at CORE, as the center is now 11 years old, and we celebrated our own 10th anniversary last year. And Tom's vision, leadership, and unwavering support have been woven into CORE's journey over the past decade, making him an integral part of our story. Tom, your leadership has been a transformative influence on both the school and CORE, and under your guidance, CORE has grown from a bold new idea into a thriving initiative with a track record of success. Your steadfast support for building meaningful local and international partnerships has been especially impactful. Your encouragement has given us the confidence to develop CORE into a globally recognized center of excellence, advancing regulatory science and healthcare through our education programs and thought leadership. Tom, all of us at CORE are deeply grateful for your leadership as Dean of Duke-NUS, and we would like to express our appreciation in this very short commemorative video, so please focus on the screen. Let's give a round of applause to Tom. Don't forget us, Tom, because we won't forget you for all the right reasons. It is fitting that this lecture is in honor of another visionary leader, the late Professor Sir Alasdair Breckenridge. As inaugural chair of CORE's advisory board, Alasdair envisioned the center as a driving force for regulatory thought leadership and capacity building in the region, and increasingly at a global level. And today's graduation ceremony for the 2024-25 cohort of CORE's graduate certificate programs in health products and medical technology regulation stands as a testament to the continuing fulfillment of that vision. Alasdair was a giant in the field, highly respected for his dedication to healthcare, patients, and populations. Having studied medicine at the University of St Andrews in Scotland, followed by an appointment as a professor of clinical pharmacology at the University of Liverpool, Alasdair charted a notable academic career. Among these were being appointed the inaugural chair of the expanded UK Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, the MHRA, and subsequently of the UK Emerging Science and Bioethics Advisory Committee. Globally, he was involved with the World Health Organization, the International Union of Pharmacology, and numerous other associations. He was awarded the Paul Martini Prize in Clinical Pharmacology and the Poulsen Medal of the Norwegian Pharmacological Society. And in the 1995 birthday honors, Alasdair was awarded the Order of the British Empire and was subsequently knighted in the Queen's 2004 New Year honors for his service to UK academic medicine. When I shared the concept of establishing the Duke-NUS Center of Regulatory Excellence in 2013, Alasdair quickly saw the critical need for regulatory training and thought leadership that CORE could provide. His vision, guidance, and personality have profoundly impacted many of us in our organizations and careers throughout the world over the years. So the Centre owes Alasdair a tremendous debt of gratitude for his unparalleled leadership and clear-sighted guidance, leading us to establish the Sir Alasdair Breckenridge Lecture to honour his memory. The lecture series has a forward-looking perspective on themes of enhancing biomedical innovation, strengthening health systems and regulation, and promoting equitable access to good, safe, and effective health products. This reflects Alasdair's commitment to advancing global health products regulation and health policy innovation for the benefit of patients, systems, and societies. The first 3 lectures constituted a trilogy addressing key global regulatory policy and practice issues during the COVID-19 pandemic and how to be better prepared for future public health emergencies. Last year's lecture during our 10th anniversary conference took a different direction as Professor Mark McClellan discussed some key issues related to the future of health regulation. And this was in line with CORE's commitment to working with the Singapore Ministry of Health on a new paradigm of converging health products and health services regulation to better manage new challenges and opportunities in the healthcare environment. This year, we are delighted and honored to welcome Professor James Kingsland as the 5th Sir Alasdair Breckenridge Lecturer. And the title of the 2025 lecture is From Setbacks to Breakthroughs, the Development of Smart Healthcare Regulation. And this is very pertinent for us as James is a member of the Ministry's Regulatory Advisory Panel that is meeting over these 2 days in Singapore to discuss various trending issues in health regulation. And we already had very significant discussions today. Also of note is the fact that James knew Alasdair in the context of the UK's National Health Service and brings a personal perspective to the Breckenridge Lecture. James is clinical professor in the School of Medicine at the University of Central Lancashire and a practicing primary care physician. He is no stranger to healthcare reform, having designed and led major national and international healthcare service transformation projects over a distinguished career spanning 4 decades. He's the founder and chair of the UK Digital Clinical Excellence Forum and co-designed the blueprint for primary care networks, leading the program to address health inequalities across England. In the 2012 Queen's Diamond Jubilee New Year's Honours, James was awarded the Order of the British Empire for services to medicine and healthcare. His influence extends widely, having served national and international advisory roles within the NHS and across healthcare industry boards. With such an illustrious career, he brings with him deep insight into both health and regulatory systems. We all look forward to his reflections on smart healthcare regulation, and it is now my distinct honor to invite Professor James Kingsland to deliver the 2025 Sir Alasdair Breckenridge Lecture. James, please.
Mr. Chair, John, thank you for your generous introduction. Director General, Dean, distinguished colleagues, honoured guests, and dare I say, some of whom now count as friends, good evening. It's both a personal and professional honour to stand before you at the Duke National University of Singapore's Medical School and its Centre of Regulatory Excellence. I'm especially grateful to be delivering this year's Sir Alasdair Breckenridge Lecture and to share in the celebrations of this year's graduating cohort. And let me begin by offering my sincere congratulations to each of you. This evening is more than a ceremony, it's a reflection on progress, on responsibility, and on some careers yet to be developed. As I stand here marking over 4 decades in healthcare, yes, despite I know you're all thinking that's hard to believe with such youthful appearance, I find myself thinking not just of professional milestones, but the people who shaped my journey, one of whom was Professor Sir Alasdair Breckenridge. Sir Alasdair was, of course, a pioneer in the field of medicines regulation and an advocate for scientific rigour, ethical responsibility, and patient-centred oversight. His work helped shape not only the UK's regulatory landscape, but also set enduring principles for global health regulation. It's both a privilege and a responsibility to deliver a lecture that bears his name. It was also a privilege to know the man. I first met Professor Alasdair Breckenridge long before he was knighted, under rather nerve-wracking circumstances. My third year undergraduate pharmacology viva voce at the University of Liverpool. He was already a formidable figure, a consultant physician at the Royal Liverpool Hospital, head of pharmacology, and a man whose intellect was matched only by his reputation. In short, he was the kind of examiner you prayed not to be allocated, or if you did, that he was in a good mood. I had done well in the exam, mostly. But in answering one of the essay questions, I mistook chlorpropamide, a diabetes treatment, for chlorpromazine, an antipsychotic. My essay was regrettably excellent, just on the wrong drug. In the viva, Professor Breckenridge looked at me with a mix of amusement and curiosity and asked, "What happened?" I told the truth. I hadn't read the question properly. He paused. "Then have you learned anything from this?" "Yes," I replied, "to always read instructions carefully, to double check, triple check, and not make that mistake as a doctor, especially when prescribing." To my relief and enduring gratitude, and why I'm standing here this evening, he passed me. What might have ended as failure became a formative lesson. He saw not just the mistake, but the opportunity within it. The generous rigor, the balance between high standards and human understanding is precisely the ethos our healthcare regulation must now embrace. Since then, I've carried that same humility and thoroughness in my teaching. And yes, I always read the small print on every document, which is why these days I'm often known as the detail man. Not glamorous, perhaps, but very safe. And in many ways, that's what regulation in healthcare should be about, not just catching mistakes, but helping us notice the details before they become disasters. My viva examiner could have failed me outright. Being the stern referee, blowing the whistle and calling time, instead he chose to be a coach. He pointed out the mistake, checked whether I'd learned the lesson, and set me on a safer path. That balance between inspector and mentor, referee and coach, is exactly the balance we now have to ask of healthcare regulation. Ladies and gentlemen, healthcare regulation is, in many ways, an institutional form of that same balance. A regulatory system must, of course, guard against harm, but it must also foster improvement, enable innovation, and above all, centre on the human experience, just as Sir Alasdair did throughout his career. We're gathered here at a moment of profound complexity and extraordinary promise. AI, genomics, digital therapeutics, cross-border health services, and public trust in health systems, each is reshaping what care looks like, who delivers, and how is it experienced. Regulatory systems, once designed for static models of care, now face a dynamic, globalized and digital frontier. The question before us is not merely how to keep up, but how to lead. At the heart of what I hope to consider in this lecture is the paradox that regulators around the world are grappling with. How can we ensure safety, accountability and trust, whilst also enabling innovation, agility and continuous learning? Should regulation be that inflexible referee with a red card, or the thoughtful coach helping the whole team raise its game? Can regulation not only protect, but also propel? I would argue, whilst it might aspire to be both and more, it must not, however, conflate inspection with quality improvement science. And also, with the title of my lecture, From Setbacks to Breakthroughs, the Development of Smart Health Regulation, this reflects a journey that is familiar to anyone working in health systems, a journey marked by complexity, resistance, and at times painful learning, but also a journey full of possibility if we have the tools, the insight, and the courage to adapt. I'd like to consider how regulatory systems can remain agile and responsive without compromising safety and trust. and a potential paths towards regulatory convergence, not only in the Asia-Pacific region, but worldwide, and to reflect on the role and principled leadership, evidence-based policy, and collaborative governance in shaping the future. I also want to explore this evolving space of smart regulation, where data and digital tools reshape how we act, where feedback loops support learning, not just punishment, and where regulators are seen not only as gatekeepers, but as partners in innovation and system strengthening. To navigate this future, we must reflect and understand the past. So let me begin by looking back, not just where regulation has come from, but how we've learned to adapt and what those lessons mean for the path ahead. Healthcare regulation in England began with church oversight and physicians' petitions to outlaw quacks as early as the 15th century. But it wasn't until the Apothecaries Act of 1815 and the Medical Act of 1858, establishing the General Medical Council, that formal enforceable standards emerged. From then, regulation expanded to midwives, nurses in the early 20th century, reflecting a wider push for professional standards in public health. However, when we discuss contemporary regulation of healthcare, particularly in today's digital context, it is more important to understand the historical evolution of oversight bodies that shaped modern regulatory practices. The Duke-NUS Centre for Regulatory Excellence is now just over 11 years old. Sir Alasdair was, of course, the first chairman of that advisory board. However, it is widely regarded that the first modern approach to healthcare regulation began in the UK with the establishment of the Commission for Health Improvement, or CHI, which operated from 2001 until its premature abolition in 2004. Though its existence was brief, just 3 years, CHI represented a fundamental shift in the regulatory landscape at that time, from a system centered on financial and activity-based targets to one that prioritized patient experience, clinical quality, and continuous improvement. Importantly, CHI was the first statutory body tasked with assessing the clinical performance of NHS hospitals in England and Wales. Its mandate extended beyond traditional financial audit functions. It focused instead on clinical governance, with the overarching aim of ensuring that care was safe, effective, and subject to ongoing improvement. Notably, the concept of health improvement was embedded in the organisation's name. CHI's mission was threefold: to evaluate how effectively NHS organisations were safeguarding patients, to promote organisational learning, and to foster measurable improvements in care. To deliver, CHI undertook 4 principal functions: reviewing clinical governance arrangements within NHS organisations, monitoring the implementation of national service frameworks in collaboration with the Audit Commission, investigating serious failures in healthcare delivery, and providing expert advice and disseminating best practice. Crucially, CHI sought to combine 2 distinct but complementary roles: that of an inspector responsible for identifying risk, and that of collaborative partner dedicated to supporting improvement. This dual approach was intended to reassure providers that the regulator would not adopt a punitive or name and shame model, but would instead operate in a spirit of transparency, partnership, and learning. CHI did not set standards itself, rather it assessed the extent to which NHS trusts were meeting the established benchmarks. And similarly, referees do not create the rules of the game, they simply enforce them. Coaches improve performance within those rules. Can we do both? This model of regulation, independent, evidence-based, and improvement-focused, offers enduring lessons. CHI demonstrated that regulation, when thoughtfully constructed, can serve not as a constraint, but as a powerful driver of excellence in care. Despite its early demise, CHI laid the foundations for future regulatory frameworks. Its functions were absorbed by the Commission for Health Care Audit and Inspection, different acronym but still standing the same, CHI, later becoming the Healthcare Commission, and eventually incorporated into the Care Quality Commission established in England in 2009. Yet, as the system evolved, so too did its character. Over time, the regulatory approach shifted away from CHI's emphasis on support and improvement, moving towards a model grounded in compliance and enforcement. The very inclusion of the term inspection in CHAI's title reflected this transformation from a focus on partnership to one of oversight and accountability. This drift from coach to referee has had significant implications. Recent independent evaluations now, including 2 national reports in 2004, have identified serious deficiencies in the Care Quality Commission. Key concerns include inconsistent and poor quality inspections, insufficient resources to carry out regulatory functions effectively, a lack of transparency in the calculation and meaning of provider ratings, and a failed £99 million transformation programme, which resulted in dysfunctional IT systems and the loss of critical inspection data. More fundamentally, these reports pointed to deep-rooted structural issues, weak leadership, fragmented internal processes, and an organisational culture unable to support meaningful improvement. While the CQC introduced a framework based on 5 domains of quality, it did so without adequately accounting for the interdependencies between those domains. As a result, assessments often lack nuance and coherence, undermining public trust and provider confidence in the regulatory system. CQC is therefore currently undergoing significant reform. And it does give us a lesson from starting in a quality improvement process and becoming a punitive reviewer. So now let's turn to Singapore, a nation with one of the world's most sophisticated regulatory ecosystems. The Ministry of Health, of course, plays the central role in ensuring that care remains safe, affordable, accessible, and of high quality. But as I review the development again in Singapore in detail, I find myself asking, is increasing regulatory complexity truly the best or only way to deliver this? Consider what's already in place. The Healthcare Services Act, HCSA, enacted in 2020, replaced the older Private Hospitals and Medical Clinics Act. Why? To keep pace with new care models. Think mobile clinics, telehealth, virtual care. HCSA introduced services-based rather than premises-based regulatory framework, arguably more agile for the future. Under this Act, a risk-based approach is used to determine which services require regulation, but currently there are 16 healthcare services under its purview, each requiring its own license. And that's just one layer. Healthcare professional regulation spreads across 7 professional bodies. The Health Services Authority regulates health products. We were talking about this earlier today, including medicines, medical devices, cell therapies, and 5 different risk-calibrated categories. The Health Information Bill mandates the contribution of patient data to the internationally advanced National Electronic Health Record, raising both opportunities for integrated care but concerns about data privacy. There's the Biological Agents Toxins Act, the Human Biomedical Research Act. So Singapore is not short of regulation. In fact, the landscape resembles a dense ecosystem, each part evolved for a reason, but overlapping and increasingly difficult to navigate. Therefore, one must ask, is increasing complexity the same as increasing safety? Or have we reached a point where intricacy impedes clarity? And we discussed this earlier today. To Singapore's credit, it is not avoiding those questions. The Ministry of Health also actively engages in horizon scanning, working with stakeholders to anticipate emerging risks and innovations. 2 key areas under close watch: artificial intelligence in diagnostics and decision-making, precision medicine based on genomics and personal health data. 2 of the central discussions being undertaken tomorrow by CORE's Regulatory Advisory Panel, which, as John said, I'm a proud member. These technology challenges, our current definitions of safety, consent, efficacy, and accountability. The Licensing, Experimentation and Adaptation Programme, LEAP, launched in 2018, is one such response, a regulatory sandbox allowing innovators to trial new models under conditional oversight. And we were talking the difference between transformation and change. I think most of the what we were talking about today is changing regulation. I think the sandbox might be the place for transformational. But there too lies a deeper question. Is LEAP a leap of faith or the foundation of smarter regulatory approaches? Because innovation by nature involves risk, and regulation by design reduces it. The challenge before us is not to eliminate this tension, but to manage it wisely. Can regulation therefore be both protective and permissive? And what of the global stage? Can we move towards regulatory convergence? I've briefly mentioned and reviewed healthcare regulation in the UK and Singapore. There are many similarities, but sometimes variable approaches. So why aren't we developing a more consistent global approach in healthcare regulation? Healthcare regulation operates within a fragmented global landscape. No single authority governs healthcare standards universally. Instead, a complex web of treaties, guidelines, and voluntary harmonisation efforts intersects with sovereign national frameworks. While this model protects national autonomy, it exposes weaknesses in coherence and effectiveness when confronted with the realities of our interconnected world. The spread of globalisation creates a different set of issues, but the aims and objectives of healthcare regulation are or should be consistent. There are several international mechanisms already shaping healthcare regulation. The WHO functions a primary normative body, establishing guidelines and coordinating the legally binding international health regulations, the IHR, which obliges 196 countries to detect and respond to cross-border health threats, not often enacted. Complementing this are organisations such as the International Organisation for Standardisation, the ISO, which develops voluntary quality safety standards. The International Council for Harmonisation, the ICH, streamlines pharmaceutical regulation across markets. For medical devices, the International Medical Device Regulators Forum and the International Pharmaceutical Regulators Programme are other attempts at globalisation and standardisation of regulation. Collectively, these initiatives represent meaningful progress towards global alignment, yet shortcomings persist. Lack of enforcement. With the exception of the IHR from the WHO, most standards are voluntary. This leaves adoption inconsistent and weakens accountability. Fragmentation and duplication. Parallel but non-uniform national requirements increase costs, delay innovation, and create barriers to access. National adaptation challenges. International guidance often require modification to fit local resources and political context, generating divergent applications that limit comparability and interoperability. And it's rather reactive rather than proactive governance. Current frameworks that are available globally tend to address crises such as pandemics after they emerge, rather than building sustainable anticipatory systems of global oversight. The globalisation of healthcare markets, the rapid circulation of medical technologies and transboundary nature of infectious diseases expose the inadequacy of nationally siloed regulatory regimes. For example, divergent requirements in pharmaceutical approval prolong innovation timelines and restrict equitable access to therapies. Similarly, inconsistent medical device oversight can delay the dissemination of life-saving technologies or undermine patient safety. In this context, greater international collaboration is not merely desirable, but necessary. A stronger, more integrated regulatory architecture could yield regulatory efficiency. Harmonised standards and mutual recognition agreements would reduce duplication, accelerate approval processes, and lower costs for both governments and industry. Equitable access, more uniform standards could help ensure that safe and effective therapies and technologies reach low and middle income countries more quickly. resilience and preparedness, a stronger collective regulatory system would enhance global capacity to respond swiftly and uniformly to pandemics and other emergencies. And innovation facilitation. Streamlined global approval pathways would enable life-saving technologies to move from development to deployment without unnecessary delays. The COVID-19 pandemic highlighted both the strengths and weaknesses of global regulatory systems. On one hand, regulators such as the US FDA, the European Medicines Agency, the EMA, and counterparts in Asia rapidly authorized vaccines under emergency provisions, often relying on shared data and an unprecedented levels of cooperation. This demonstrated the potential of cross-border collaboration. On the other hand, the lack of a harmonized framework created uneven timelines, duplicative reviews, and inequitable distribution. While high-income countries secured early access to vaccines, many low and middle-income nations faced delays due to both regulatory and supply chain barriers. The absence of a coordinated global approval process contributed to the fragmented response, eroding public trust and slowing the equitable rollout of life-saving technologies. To address existing limitations, a more integrated global regulatory framework should be pursued, and I know it's under discussion, but possible pathways may include expanding the binding scope of the WHIHR to cover pharmaceutical and medical device regulation, not only disease surveillance. Developing mutual recognition mechanisms among national agencies to build trust and reduce duplicative reviews. Establishing a global regulatory observatory under the WHO, or a new consortium to monitor compliance, data sharing, and track implementation of standards. And enhancing capacity building initiatives, ensuring that lower resource nations can participate fully in and benefit from global harmonizations. The current patchwork of global health regulation demonstrates the value of international cooperation, but also its limitations. Without enhanced collaboration, potentially through stronger enforcement mechanisms and mutual recognition agreements and more robust global governance, healthcare regulation will continue to lag behind the realities of an interconnected world. Building greater alignment is therefore both a technical and ethical imperative for safeguarding public health globally. Technologies are global, pandemics are global, patients are global and increasingly move physically and digitally across borders. Yet our regulatory systems remain largely national and independent, sometimes fragmented and often inconsistent across jurisdictions. Can we imagine a world in which shared regulatory principles, grounded in ethics, evidence, and patient-centeredness, allow for trustworthy innovation at scale across systems? We don't rewrite aviation standards every time a plane lands in a new country. Global frameworks govern aircraft safety because lives depend on it. The same is true for climate accords, laws of war, and even moral and religious systems that span borders. In areas where the stakes are highest, we regulate collectively. So why in healthcare, arguably our most universal human concern, still regulated in silos? Each nation builds its own system, insisting its context is unique, layering international collaborations on top only after the fact. The result: fragmentation, duplication, delays, and patients who suffer while proven innovations are slow to reach them. This is not just inefficient, it is at times unethical. There is another barrier. Too often we conflate innovation with invention. We celebrate the creation of new tools, but ignore equally critical work, often failing to adopt and spread what already works. The "not invented here" syndrome runs deep. A quiet, insidious form of professional pride that convinces us our context is unique, that our system must be different, that what works elsewhere can't possibly work here. A treatment proven aboard may be disseminated simply because it wasn't developed locally. And so we'd repeat pilots, we'd reinvent programs and waste years and patients wait. True innovation is not invention alone. It is invention plus adoption and dissemination. If something works, regardless where it comes from, it should be embraced, scaled, and shared. We need a paradigm shift from national insularity to global humility, from parallel experiments to shared solutions, from fragmented frameworks to unified standards, from competition in invention to collaboration in regulation. The shift requires action. If I may, I can offer 4 proposals, not radical, but I would suggest essential. First, why not create an international healthcare regulatory framework, a global charter for safety, efficacy, and ethical evaluation, minimal standards, globally agreed, universally respected. Second, we need a global evidence sharing platform, an open, trusted system where clinical data, trial results, and outcomes are pooled across borders, because data kept in silos is knowledge wasted. Third, align on pathways for rapid adoption so that proven innovations in one country can be fast-tracked into others without starting from scratch. And fourth, building a culture of collaborative innovation, a culture rooted not in pride, but in humility, one that values what works wherever it originates and rewards those who adopt and scale, not just those who invent. Illness does not carry a passport. Cancer does not recognize a flag. Pandemics do not stop at customs. If we can regulate the skies above us, the climate around us, the conduct of war, surely we can regulate healthcare and most human of all pursuits collectively and collaboratively, globally. The time for fragmented regulation has passed. The time for collective innovation is now. And Singapore could lead the way. We could solve it tomorrow. What would it take? We can discuss this tomorrow, to build shared regulatory principles across borders. Well, that's for governments to discuss. But this should not be a mere idealism or desire. I would suggest it's an imperative. Because when the next global health challenge arises, and it will, our ability to respond will not just depend on clinical readiness, but on regulatory coherence. And we demonstrated how poor we are at that during the COVID-19 pandemic. So what should international smart healthcare regulation look like? It's agile yet principled, data-informed but human-centered, protective yet enabling. It does not confuse complexity with quality. Rather, it aims for clarity, accountability, and trust, built not on bureaucracy, but on shared purpose. History tells us how regulation evolves to meet challenges of its time. For digital healthcare, regulators must learn from the balance of independence, evidence-based assessment, and patient-centered focus, while extending these principles to the digital domain. This is where much of my current healthcare regulatory work is focused. As chair of the Digital Clinical Excellence Forum in the UK, we are looking to connect globally with our work on quality, safety, and building public trust in a digitally enabled healthcare world. The focus should always remain the same, ensuring safety, transparency, accountability, and continuous improvement, but adapted to a context where technology, algorithms, and data security play central roles. Regulators now face the task of applying consistent principles to AI in healthcare, electronic health records, telemedicine, and digital diagnostics. Finally, I've spoken about the paradox of improvement and inspection, the axis of safety and quality, and whether a regulator is a stern judge or a trusted guide. Should regulation only enforce standards, the referee with the red card, or should it also improve quality, the coach helping the whole team raise the game? And more importantly, how do we balance these roles while keeping patients at the very centre? If we only regulate for safety, we risk a culture of fear, where professionals hide mistakes. If we only regulate for quality, we risk complacency, improvement without accountability. But if we can strike the right balance, then regulation can protect the public and elevate practice. it can be the reason healthcare isn't just safe, but excellent. So I returned to that long ago Viva. Professor Breckenridge had every right to fail me, but instead he looked for the lesson, he tested whether I had learned, then he trusted me to do better. That, I believe, is the essence of what regulation should be. Firm enough to uphold standards, wise enough to see potential, generous enough to foster growth. Because the best regulatory systems don't merely stop us from answering the wrong question, they help ensure we are all, governments, professionals, innovators, asking the right ones. As we step into a future defined by both promise and pressure, hopefully we can carry forward the legacy of Sir Alasdair Breckenridge, his legacy of rigour with humility, standards with compassion, and leadership with vision. Let's not regulate simply to control, but to enable excellence. Let's not fear complexity, but strive for clarity, but aim for simplicity. And let's always remember that the purpose of regulation is not just safety, but trust, progress, and care. As we build ever more sophisticated regulatory systems, we must be asking, are we regulating for safety or certainty? Are we creating resilience or just red tape? Are we enabling better care or just managing risk? And can we share knowledge, experience, and progress with regulating healthcare globally? Because complexity for its own sake is not a virtue, but clarity, agility, and purpose, those are. And finally, let's not confuse inspection, as I was saying earlier, with continuous quality improvement. If you have, thank you for listening. I was going to just finally show the only photograph I have of Professor, as he was, Breckenridge at the back there. This was, how can I even look younger? That is me at the front there with some of the clinical team, some of the this was when Alasdair Breckenridge was the regional chairman before he moved on to MHRA. But we never spoke about the Viva again. But he remained very supportive. Maybe he did remember. And this was when he came to open a branch of our general practice at the time. And finally, just to my thanks again for the invitation. I still thoroughly enjoy coming to Singapore and meeting with colleagues. And hopefully I am passing on some wisdom. Thank you.
Once again, thank you, Professor Kingsland. Now, as we move in the session for discussion, may I invite Professor Kingsland to take a seat over here, and also Professor John Lim.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, James. It was a very inspiring lecture, a lot of food for thought. And regulatory advisory panel members, I don't know, but we've surreptitiously sneaked in an extra session for you this evening because we're actually not doing the normal stuff we do during a lecture and just end off with the speaker, but we have some time for discussion now. So firstly, thank you very much, James, for provoking us in terms of thinking. You've identified the issues, the challenges. You've also given us a clarion call that's a vision to try and bring together greater convergence of regulation across the world. But as we all know, that's easier said than done, even though I'm sure we all believe in what you've been advocating. And I wonder, there are microphones around here, and I do look to the members of the Regulatory Advisory Panel, but in fact, anyone in the audience who would either like to comment on what James has said this evening or to ask a question. But perhaps I can just begin, and if you do want a microphone, my colleagues will pass a microphone to you, and you can just raise your hand. But perhaps, James, I also want to address this issue of regulation and innovation, and our guest of honor, Professor Kenneth Mack, was here in this very auditorium a few weeks ago, speaking about the relationship between health regulation and innovation, and he very eloquently described it as a dance between regulation and innovation. It was a very lyrical description because we were trying to think of whether regulation always has to follow innovation, and does it always have to follow the science rather than lead? And in fact, one of our lecturers 2 years ago, I think, Richard Hatchett from CEPI, in fact, challenged the audience at that time to say that regulators should at least be keeping abreast with scientific innovation and progress. So I don't know, what are your thoughts on this in terms of regulation and innovation? Perhaps contextualize it in the context of what we've been talking about today in terms of what you understand of the Singapore system, but also from your experience in the UK and globally.
Right, John. And that, again, I talked about a paradox between where regulation, certainly in the UK, does now feel like it's a punitive inspection, and often leads to tension and people being prepared for that moment in time, rather than it being seen as an opportunity to develop. I also think that innovation, if you speak to anyone in healthcare, we are all innovators. We don't know what we mean by that. Often we default to invention. So we like to invent. I think regulation can see if somebody's invented something, it's got evidence behind it. I think the most important part of innovation is the scaling and spread adoption of that, because without it, the invention really isn't of much use long term until it's proven that others will adopt it. And that's the difficult part because of the, as I was saying, the not invented here syndrome. I don't know how that spreads through Singapore, but it is rife through the UK. I remember when we were having Sir Alasdair opening up our branch surgery, doing what I thought was good things in a place called Wallasey on the Wirral Peninsula across from Liverpool. He opened a new surgery. We're demonstrating a new way of delivering extended care in a community setting. But colleagues in Birkenhead were saying, we've got a very different population. It won't work here, 2 miles down the road. And we find that all the time. So I think that balance between celebrating new ways of working, I think regulation's got a place to say, well, are we seeing this adopted? If we've said it's been regulated, it's licensed, it has been assessed as something that's really good, it should be encouraged to develop, moving into the sort of coaching, there is a sense of how does that then lead to adoption and spread, not just across other services in Singapore, but why aren't we saying, well, if this works in Singapore, we've studied it, we've got the evidence behind it, why would others want to duplicate something that translates across borders?
Questions or comments from the audience? Anyone who would like to add to this?
Hi.
Yes, please, Jack.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Kingsland. There's one comment and there's one maybe questions. The first comment is really recognize your story you're talking about, like the scary inspector or a coach or mentor inspector. It can happen in real life because it happened when I doing my pharmacy practice in UK. 2 pharmacy shop, one in the different inspect by different inspector. One pharmacy shop, they really scared of inspector. That everybody easy to understand. Inspector always looks scary maybe. But the other shop welcome inspector every time. They're so excited to see him. Because when he come, he say, this is a problem there. But I see other shop, how they solve this problem. And then maybe you can take this as advice, etc. So, they found problem, of course, but they're giving advice, sharing good practice. They make their shop better. The shop is getting better and better after more inspector come. So, it's like the good friend and a lot of a good value from a so-called inspector. So, the story you're talking about is inspector could be a very value-added rather than a scary person, like a typical so-called inspector. So that's the one story I also want to resonate. The second thing is maybe I want to get your comment is, I work in this regulatory for 20-something years. There are all sorts of organization effort to talk about harmonization, maybe nowadays convergence. And I somehow found a magic solution. But this magic solution not easy to happen. The magic solution is I see people can harmonize quickly, and that's European Union. Okay, they can harmonize one day, maybe not one day, in a very quick time. Okay, one regulation, registration, all country recognize, even one currency, one whatever. So to me, the magic bullet is political alliance. If the whole, I don't know, a list of countries agree on something, then everything can be done, because they said that regulation is not rocket science. Medical device, I mean, the definition of something not aligned, we can align overnight. It's not like we need years like that. But without this political thing, may be difficult. So I just want to get your opinion is there any chance that to invite some political element into this harmonization? Because without this, it seems, for example, I won't expect US and Europe harmonized, even though they both are expert in their jurisdiction, but they never harmonize, right? So, and it won't be. That's the so-called magic bullet but I just want to get your opinion on this political element. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I just mentioned it was almost a one-liner when I was saying about the adoption across borders. It is for governments to drive that. There might be one leading light, like Singapore, that starts to build on. There are some established, as I was saying, the WHO have got some established legally binding agreements across, I think it's 196 nations. But I don't. What I was describing, it's easy to stand at a lectern and describe a future. The realities are in the depths of whether governments will accept that as much a stage as regulators working together. Because there are all sorts of societies. I often interact with the European Partnership for Supervisory Organisations, where many of the supervisory organisations, healthcare regulators across Europe meet on a regular basis, and now it's linked to the Asia Pacific group of regulators. So there is some harmonisation, but to achieve what I was saying about could we rapidly adopt some of the regulatory experience and proven science in one country across another, I think that's for governments. And just a word on your consistencies, and that's one of the reasons after 25 years, the Care Quality Commission, and I know it's been live streamed, but it has failed quite spectacularly because it had inconsistencies in its approach to regulation and lost the focus on what it was trying to do. Hence, it's having a complete reform and rethink. And I don't think it's an easy answer. We're using the analogy of the game with a referee and a coach. You can't be 1 minute a referee and next coaching the team. They're different skills and different disciplines. But there's somewhere at that analogy where you can blend the two. But I think we need to focus on the continual improvement, the regulation that is finding out if there are problems and ensuring safety, but having a significant role in helping innovation, adoption, spread, and taking practice further. So, the second regulator you were talking about is the welcome person who's coming in to coach. Yes, assess whether there's safe practice, but encourage the development rather than just that. Whereas CQC has failed, it was a moment in time. Are all the ducks lined up? Yes or no? No, we've got some action against you. Yes, we'll see you next year. That doesn't really help in quality improvement.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi, James. Thanks. Keith McNeil from Australia. Compelling stuff. And of course, there's no difference to what happens to the CQC and what happens down in Australia. In my experience, very little evidence to support the sort of regulatory inspection kind of regimes that are put in place. And yet one of the reasons that these people go in to do or the organisations are going to do it is to look at how evidence is being used effectively for the generation of quality. Do you have thoughts about that paradox, and what's the psychology that's driving that very draconian regulatory inspectorial mindset versus something that would be supportive and quality improving?
Yeah, oversimplifying, but it goes back to the one bad apple. We are frightened of the terrible disaster that occasionally occurs. I was in our own Department of Health at the time when probably the world's greatest mass murderer, who happened to be a British GP, was missed in the system. We brought in And that changed when I was saying about the Commission for Health Improvement into inspection because of the concerns of that terrible disaster. But 20 years on, we have a nurse murderer. So the inspection process to try and make sure that that never happened again was unsuccessful. But it was the adopted way then of saying that's the only way we can keep the public safe. And it became much more punitive than in the early stages of being a bit more collaborative. And sometimes you were able to find out a lot more by going in as a collaborator with the provider rather than the person with the clipboard. But I think it's possibly that we became so concerned about those unusual, terrible, disastrous times that often drive change more than celebrating the great practice.
Laurentine?
Thank you. I think, and it's always interesting which words are used in which way. And I noticed that in this health regulation context, you use the word regulation and inspection, etc., in ways which maybe in other sectors they would use completely differently. And to my mind, one of the things that comes through is there's maybe learning from other fields is there seems to be a lot too much reliance on the idea that regulating is licensing. And what we find broadly is licensing has mostly very little impact on the quality of service or the, what will really happen. There may be, you have your degree, okay, either you recognize your degree or we don't. Do we need an additional licensing procedure on top of this? A lot of countries don't have it, right? But regulate, meaning have rules, right? And have rules. And then how do you have rules? You have rules because you have also institutions trying to make the rules happen, of which inspection can be a part, but it depends which kind of inspection, right? What are you trying to find? If you come with a clipboard, you're never going to find anything for sure. And you're probably never going to find the murderers anyway. I mean, we don't find murderers with the general police either. I mean, the rate of elucidation of murder is non-existent. I mean, let's be serious. But if you were to find it, you would only find it by crossing very complex metrics and trying to see, oh, maybe this GB has some kind of anomalous rates of this or that. Certainly not by going there and asking questions or by asking the guy or the lady to take a test. I mean, this is, we keep creating rules that have nothing to do with the subject at hand. So I think one of the key questions behind we should always ask is, does this rule and does this mechanism have any chance, even logically, to have an impact on the problem we're saying we're trying to solve? And this, in 90% of cases across the world, in all kinds of fields, the answer is like, no, actually, it can't possibly have an impact. So why do we even have it? That was, yeah, and sorry, and just wrapping up, I mean, your excellent point about internationally adopting things. I mean, I hope people can share more of this. People have reviewed it. Why do I review it again? But we see also in other fields, even when there's already a lot more harmonization, like in food, how slow it is for people to change methods and to recognize that, hey, even you share the same rules, right? We have the same rules on food all across the European Union and on environment, but still the methods are quite different. It's very slow to change.
Well, it's really interesting, as I was saying, with innovation, we use the word, but we mean different things by it. And I think regulation's another one where we think, well, if we say we're a regulator, everyone must know what that means. And within it, there may be that paradox of inspection versus quality improvement. So I think it's understanding. The other thing that we brought in a way of improving services was commissioning services. And as soon as we used the word, everyone thought we know what we mean by it. And it became a mess because we didn't describe or qualify exactly what we meant by it. And I think regulation is one of those where if you ask different regulators, and certainly not just in healthcare, that they'll have different definitions, but in healthcare, certainly in the UK, some will talk about inspection and some will talk about quality improvement. But they're both in the same organization, they're both regulators. I think we need to be just clarifying what we're trying to achieve and saying you can't do one without the other. It's not just an either or, but we can drift in the wrong way if we don't actually clarify what we mean by the regulatory system.
We'll take one more question.
Thank you so much, Professor Kingsland. My name is Lara Detunji. I work with Eli Lilly and Company. And your presentation tonight has been really spot on with what we are, I guess, trying to achieve for patients globally. Drug development, you talked about invention and innovation. I think drug development, there's been a lot of innovation over the years. And resulting from that, we see that, from say first human dosing to actually getting the drugs approved, it used to be about 14 years, 20 years ago. Now we've reduced that to an average about 7 years. So you can imagine so much innovation has gone into drug development to be able to accelerate. But then when we get to the point where the regulators need to review this, you've talked about that, there's so much delay and so much country-specific reviews, even for countries that require, the FDA to have licensed the drug or EMA to have licensed the drug, they still take 2, 3, 4 years at times to review the same package. And so I think, you are singing to the choir here. Everybody wants the same thing, but how do we make it happen? How do we get to a point where actually this becomes, the norm, that when you do have this, whether it's regulatory convergence, work sharing modules, anything that has been come up with, how do we ensure adoption? We've talked about, is it political, whatever it is, right? Lots of geopolitical reasons across the world, but importantly is how do we make this happen, and also for inspections. So it's really the how, isn't it? More than actually what we want to achieve. I think you also talked about putting information on the clouds, because interestingly, through this review process, we spent so much time with regulators saying, so what was the comment by the FDA? So what was the comment, and so it's having access to that may help to accelerate some of those processes. So I think that what would be really good for us to understand and maybe discuss really is what's the obstacle to making this happen, right? And what can we do, whether it's regulators or industry or whatever, to make sure that patients actually get access to drugs without having these years and years of drug lag and delay. And my other comment is potentially about how regulators can really help to drive innovation. Is, when we look at things like gene therapies going forward, there's so much that is unknown about what that regulation should look like. And you get the impression that the regulators are kind of waiting for industry to go figure it out, right? Tell us what we should be reviewing, and then we'll review that. And what we need really here is for the regulators to actually be on the forefront of that, to actually tell us what they want to see, and then go and design a program that actually helps address those questions. So it'd be nice to see that dynamic kind of change going forwards.
Thank you. Would you like to respond to that?
Well, yeah, thank you for the comments. And I did I hear Eli Lilly? Yeah, if Eli Lilly are having trouble cross-border, then James Kingsland hasn't got a chance. However, I think it's if we start to articulate the fact it can be done, there's got to be a lobbying approach, sadly, to it, because it will only change starting with government acceptance. Most regulators are part of government departments, and then the regulatory system driving it. But it's what I've described, more than an aspiration. John will know far better than me that it's a long journey. But if we don't articulate it, don't lobby for it, the only thing for certain, it will never happen. But if we try and in these sorts of fora take that out, and I can't think of a better word than lobbying, because it's a lot of what happens to change governments' minds or political parties' minds. But it'd be, if there was a centre of excellence to do that, then what better place than core to lead or drive it?
Well, on that note, well, I think the hour is relatively late, especially for the regulatory advisory panel, some of whom just arrived at 5 a.m. this morning, I understand. So I think you do need a rest. But thank you so much, James, for being our 5th Alasdair Breckenridge lecturer. And you've given us a lot of food for thought. But I think what is important is the clarion call you made. But I think there is light at the end of the tunnel. There's hope on the horizon. And I think not just in terms of what we've been discussing these 2 days, but I think the pandemic, of course, moved things forward quite significantly. Unfortunately, after that, as things revert to normal, so did some of the progress made in terms of the regulatory innovation during the pandemic itself, but nonetheless, it showed that things could be done. And I think what we're discussing now in terms of this convergence of products, services, and eventually professional regulation is something quite unique. But if it's proven to work, certainly not by core, but really by Singapore, then I think it does actually potentially open the way to adoption or adaptation by other countries around the world. So on that hopeful note, thank you very much to all those who've been with us this evening. Again, congratulations to all the graduates. And it's been a pleasure to just spend this evening with you. And thank you very much to our guest of honor, Professor Kenneth Mak, and of course, to Professor Tom Kaufman, whom we really will miss deeply. So on that note, please give a round of applause to James and to all of you for being here. Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead. And may I now invite Professor John Lim to give a token of appreciation for Professor Kingsland. Thank you once again, Professor Kingsland and Professor John Lim. Now, as we come to the end of the evening, may I take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you for attending and joining us, in fact, for this 2025 Sir Alasdair Breckenridge lecture. Okay, but hope to see all of you again. For those, in fact, joining the graduate certificate, there are always other courses to help you along your learning journey. So if not, thank you once again, and hope to see you soon again. Thank you.